The judgment hall rose like a black flower under the pale sky, and the crowd held its breath as Sarai walked the long path between the pillars, her head high and her heart a tight knot. She was a princess exiled by the council of her own blood for speaking against a war that had already eaten a generation. The warlords had chosen a punishment that would live in songs. They would bind her to a human officer and make her house kneel before new rules. There was a low stir as the human stepped forward. A tall man in a simple dark uniform with clean boots and eyes like rain on old stone. He did not look like a conqueror or a begging envoy. He looked like a soldier who had accepted many losses and learned to carry them without noise. The old speaker of the council lifted the verdict tablet and read it with a voice like iron water. Sarai of House Varen. You are bound to Elias Hale, protector of the border cities. The union is to seal the accord and end the raids you will reside with. Him and honor our decree. The words hit Sarai like stones, but she did not flinch. She had asked for peace and they had granted it with a chain. Her pride rose hot. She told herself she would never bend. She would be a cold flame in a strange house, and she would find her own way free again. She looked at the man and waited for hunger or triumph and saw neither. Instead, she met a quiet steadiness, and it made her anger falter. Just for a beat. Elias stepped closer with formal caution and stopped. At a respectful distance, he bowed slightly in the human way and offered his open palm. Nothing forced. No grasp. He spoke in clear, simple language that most in the hall understood. Princess Sarai. I will honor your choice at every step. I claim no right that you do not give. His words slid through the hall like a new wind. Some scoffed, some frowned. Sarai kept her face still, though the promise struck a hidden place in her chest. She had trained all her life to read posture and tone, and his body told no lie. He was ready to protect but not to take. He waited, and that waiting was a strange gift. She lifted her palm because the ritual demanded a greeting, and because she would not show fear. Their hands met, palm to palm, warm skin to skin, and the hall flashed with a low blue light as if the old stones remembered a buried sun. A lattice of luminous lines leapt from her wrist to his, and formed a pattern that had not been seen in living memory. It was the treaty sigil of the first. Peace between their peoples, a living code that slept inside certain bloodlines and woke only when trust passed through touch. The hall erupted in gasps. The council speaker staggered. 2 guards drew weapons without thinking, and then slowly lowered them as the lines cooled but did not fade. Sarai stared at the light across her skin, then at Elias. It played across his palm in the same shape as if their bodies had become a matched key. Her heart beat hard. Not with romance, she told herself, but with a deep shock that carried the taste of old stories. Her tutors had said the sigil was a myth, a trick of poets to make oaths glow in memory. Yet here it was, steady and warm. Elias did not seize her, did not shout claim. He only looked at the light, and then at her, and his eyes softened, not with pity but with understanding. He lowered his hand and the glow sank into their skin like a slow breath. The silence that followed was heavy and strange. A chamber servant hurried forward with a device. To scan the pattern, elders whispered in alarm. One of the warlords spat. The old speaker gathered himself and tried to twist the moment back under control. The sentence stands. He said the punishment binds the houses. The glow means nothing. The glow means everything. Sarai answered before she could stop herself. Her voice carried without effort. It means the first peace was real, and it means our words today will echo beyond this hall. She did not know why she defended a ceremony that caged her, but some part of her spine refused the warlord's sneer. Elias did not smile. He did not use her words as a lever. He only nodded once as if to say, truth is truth, even when it hurts. After the verdict, they led her to a small side room where a travel coat and a sealed case waited. The door closed on the noise of the court, and the quiet felt like a deep pond. She leaned on the table and let her breath go. At last her hands shook. She was not weak. She was tired of being brave in front of wolves. She looked up when she heard a soft knock, and the human officer stepped in with a respectful pause. Permission to enter, he said. She gave a short nod because she would not forget her rank, even if it had been used against her. He stood by the door. and spoke in the same even tone. We depart within the hour. There will be a public route through the central square for safety. I have arranged a private cabin on the shuttle. No press, no crowd if you prefer. Otherwise I will follow your wish. You speak, as if I have choices, she said. Tasting the bitter edge of the word. You do, he said, and he set a small cloth bag on the table. Your knife is inside if you wish to carry it. It is your right. Her gaze snapped to his face. This was new. Her knife had been taken when they seized her months ago, and she had not seen it since. He did not look proud. He did not look afraid. He looked like a man returning a lost book. She opened the bag, and the old handle pressed against her palm with a memory of training. Halls in her mother's voice, the weight steadied her. She slid the knife into her belt and felt more like herself. On the walk to the square, the city swelled around them with hard light and market smells. Vendors fell silent as they saw the pair. Above on the gallery railing, soldiers from both sides watched with guarded faces. Chants rose and then faltered as the rumor of the glowing sigil ran through the crowd like a quick fever. Sarai moved with her chin high. Elias walked a half step, behind and to the side, not in front. Not pushing, not claiming he controlled the route without showing force. He marked sightlines and shielded her from thrown fruit or sour words with small shifts of his body that looked like accident twice. He took a hit meant for her, once with his shoulder, once with his forearm, and he did not react beyond a calm blink. She had seen men make a theater of pain to win favor. He did not. And that quiet cut through her anger bit by bit. At the shuttle ramp, a group of young hotbloods from her own people broke from the crowd and charged a last insult before exile. They shouted the name of her house as if it burned, and one of them drew a concealed spark blade. The guards moved, slow, tangled by orders. Elias moved fast, but not with brute force. He snapped a stabilizer pole from a banner stand and used it to lever the blade hand sideways, then stepped inside the lunge and locked the attacker's elbow without breaking bone. He guided the fall so no one was trampled. Sarai found her own stance without thinking and checked the others with a sharp command that carried the weight of a princess who had trained on parade grounds since childhood. The youths froze as the guards finally arrived and dragged them back. Elias returned the pole to the stand without fuss. The crowd's noise shifted from cruel delight to uneasy respect. Inside the shuttle cabin, the doors sealed and a soft hum rose as the engines warmed. The city fell away through the window. Sarai sat across from Elias at a narrow table. The glow on her palm pulsed once more, and she saw him glance at his hand with the same small surprise. He looked up and spoke with no drama about the flight plan. The frontier city where they would live, the mixed district where both species shared streets, the school that needed engineers and the clinic that needed steady hands. He did not tell her how she would live. He told her who might need help if she wished to work. She listened, at first to judge him, and then because the simple shape of a life drew itself on the air like a map. She had not expected a map, only a cage. When the engines pushed them toward the sky, a weight lifted in her chest that she had not named. Fear of the court, fear of being watched, fear of becoming a symbol with no voice. She still hated her sentence and she still guarded her pride. But a small ember of curiosity lit beneath the ash he had not grabbed. He had given, and he had stood between her and harm without making a show. The glow on her hand was a question that would not sleep. She kept her face calm, but her thoughts moved like birds over water. The council wanted her silence. The city wanted a spectacle. The warlords wanted an emblem. Elias seemed to want none of these. He wanted her to choose, and that thought unsettled her more than the bright hall or the shouting crowd. As the stars thinned and the shuttle reached clear dark, she spoke the first soft words she had given him. All day, tell me what you believe about us, and he answered in that same level voice that he believed people are more than the orders they receive, and that peace is a craft that needs hands from both sides, and that he would never touch her without her. Yes, the glow on her palm warmed again for a breath, and she folded her hand over it, as if she could keep the heat from escaping into the cold cabin. The old stories said the first peace grew when strangers offered safe water at the road, and meant it. She looked out at the spread of night and wondered if the road had found her again in a shape she had not wanted, and in a voice that did not command, but invited. The shuttle drifted through the silver mist of dawn above the frontier city, and Sarai pressed her palm to the window, watching clouds slide beneath them like slow rivers. The planet below was alive with colors she did not expect. Not the harsh steel grays of her homeland, but greens and soft golds, a world that looked almost. Kind Elias sat across from her reading a data slate, his posture still soldier straight but his gaze softer than before. She tried to guess his thoughts. Perhaps he was calculating guard shifts or writing a report. Perhaps he was. Simply tired, yet even in stillness he seemed alert, like someone who had learned long ago that peace could shatter without warning. When the shuttle touched down, the doors opened to a wall of sound. The city was not vast, but dense, full of mixed species, who had learned to trade and argue in equal measure. Smells of metal oil and food merged into a heat haze. Voices rose sharp and musical. A group of children ran beside the landing path, waving bright scraps of cloth. Some shouted her name half in fear, half in awe. Sarai pulled her cloak tighter over her uniform that still carried the crest of her fallen house. Elias spoke quietly. "Stay close to me. The outer ring has had trouble lately. Smugglers, rebels, angry veterans from both sides. They like to provoke for show." She gave a short nod and followed him down the ramp. The air hit her like a current, alive with spice and dust and the faint scent of storm. She felt the crowd's eyes on her. The alien princess bound to a human most saw, a symbol, not a person. Some spat words in her tongue that meant traitor. Others muttered in human slang that she could barely translate. Elias ignored them, his face a calm mask. He led her through the customs gate without showing weapons or rank. He did not need to. His authority moved with him, quiet and sure. The guards saluted, though he said nothing. Only a small flick of his hand guided her toward a waiting transport. A wheeled ground car, older than she expected, painted dull blue with worn seats inside. It smelled of old leather and faint ozone from the electric cells. As they drove deeper into the city, she saw markets where alien vendors sold parts grown from biocoral beside human engineers, hawking spare circuits. She saw a temple built from two styles fused together, one half curved and luminous, the other angular and raw. She did not know whether to laugh or grieve at the sight of such uneasy blending. Elias watched the road in silence, until she finally asked why. "Do you live here instead of the capital?" He replied, "Because this is where the work matters. The capital only argues, the border keeps the peace." She studied him, trying to find the edge of his pride, but there was none. Only purpose. They reached a modest house near the inner canal district. Not a palace, not even a villa. 2 stories of stone and metal framed by old trees. A few neighbors looked out, curious. 1 or 2 waved. He nodded back. She felt exposed, but he opened the gate for her and stepped aside, letting her cross. First she entered, expecting guards or servants, but found none. Only a cool hall with plain walls and a low hum of power lines. He led her to a room that opened wide to a small garden where rain had just fallen. Drops hung on long grass and the air carried the scent of wet earth. For a moment it felt like a memory of freedom. He said, "This house belongs to the mission. It will serve as our residence. There are separate quarters. You will have privacy and access to the study, the lab, and the terrace." She said, "You speak as if this is temporary." He replied, "All service is temporary." Later that day they visited the local council to record her arrival. The meeting hall was filled with mixed officials and their wary eyes. Every question cut like a blade. How long would she stay? What authority did she claim? What proof did she have that the treaty bond was genuine? Elias stood beside her, but did not answer for her. He let her speak in her own voice. And when she faltered, on legal terms, he quietly offered the translation no more. He gave her room to stand. It struck her again. How different he was from the men she knew who built power by speaking over others. He seemed to build it by silence. When they left the hall, the press outside roared, reporters from both species shouting questions about love and punishment, and whether she would bear an heir to seal the peace. She felt her throat close with fury. Elias raised a hand and said only one sentence, "This marriage is an act of peace, not of possession." And the crowd fell to murmurs. The words rippled outward, and she could see faces shifting from scorn to thought. That night Sarai stood on the balcony above the canal. Lights glimmered on the water. She could hear the hum of distant factories, and the soft call of night insects from the park below the city felt alien, yet oddly alive. Elias brought 2 cups of warm drink and placed one near her, then stepped back. He said, "It is made from local roots, bitter, But, calming, she hesitated, then took a sip. The taste was sharp, earthy, real, he said. Tomorrow you will be free to walk the district and escort will follow discreetly. There is a library, a temple garden, and an engineering yard if you wish to see how we build, she asked. Why offer me freedom if your leaders want a symbol? He looked at her with a faint trace of tired humor. Because I am not my leaders. She turned away, but the words clung to her. He stood there without expectation. The stars reflected. In his eyes she wanted to hate him for the calm that unsettled her, for the way he refused to treat her like a threat or a prize. But her hatred had no place to land. It slid off the walls of his quiet decency like rain off stone. She felt the glow of the old bond stir again beneath her skin. Faint but present, as if listening to their breaths, she remembered the first flash of light in the hall and wondered what ancient code still slept within their blood. 2 days later, the peace broke. A rebel cell from her own species attacked the outer power grid. The explosions cut light to half the district and fires burned in the market square. Elias was already moving before the alarms fully sounded, his voice steady through the comm lines coordinating. Drones and rescue crews Sarai followed against orders. She could not sit idle when her people's anger killed the innocent. She reached the square amid smoke and broken glass and saw Elias shielding a child with his body while giving orders to calm the crowd. He used no weapon, only his presence and a simple loudspeaker, telling both sides to form lines to pass buckets of water. The image burned into her mind because it made no sense. This man who had every reason to hate was choosing to protect. When the last fire died, he turned to her covered in soot. His arm cut but his eyes steady. She asked, why you risk yourself for those who hate you? He answered, because someone must begin again. She looked around at the wreckage and for the first time felt the weight of what her warlords had done, not only to their enemies but to themselves. Pride had become a fire that devoured all it touched as she stood there. The sigil on her palm warmed again. Faint gold in the night, she met his gaze and saw no demand, only quiet endurance, and she knew that the punishment meant to humiliate her had instead begun to unravel something deeper inside her. She felt a tremor, not of fear, but of awakening, the thought that perhaps peace was not given by decree but earned in moments like this, between one breath and another, as the city slowly began to breathe again around them. The morning after the fires, the city was heavy with ash and silence, and Sarai walked through the ruined market. Beside Elias, the air smelled of smoke, and cooling metal vendors picked through what was left, some angry, some stunned. All watching the human officer and the alien princess walking together without guards. She could feel their stares like small blades, but she walked tall, her cloak torn, her hand still faintly marked by the glowing sigil. Elias spoke to a group of engineers arranging supply routes, and she listened, hearing how he spoke with authority, but without shouting, each order clear, each question invited. He thanked them when they finished. She realized no commander in her world would thank anyone below rank. It unsettled her again, this habit of humility that seemed stronger than pride. They spent hours inspecting the damage. He lifted beams to free trapped workers, and she used her command tone to calm civilians who still feared collapse when a small child ran to her crying for a missing mother. Sarai knelt and held her close. The gesture drew murmurs around the square, whispers that the princess who once defied her counsel now soothed strangers, when the mother was found safe and weeping. Sarai felt something twist in her chest that she could not name. She looked up and saw Elias watching from a distance, not smiling, not intruding, just present like a steady star in smoke. She rose and for the first time in many months said, "Thank you to the wind, because it carried voices, not screams." That evening they returned to the house exhausted. The quiet felt too wide. She sat at the table, running her fingers over the faint glow on her palm. It had dimmed since the market but pulsed whenever she thought of the fire. She wondered if it fed on trust, on shared will. Elias entered carrying a small field kit to clean his wound. She rose instinctively to help but caught herself and hesitated. He noticed and said softly, "I can manage," but his tone held invitation, not command. She walked over and opened the kit. She cleaned the shallow cut along his arm. The scent of antiseptic sharp between them. He did not flinch, his eyes steady on her face. He said, "You do not have to do this," she said. "I know then." Silence, deep and fragile, stretched like glass between them. When he finally spoke, it was about orders from high, Command reinforcements were coming, the overseers. The distant power behind both governments had requested oversight of the peace process. Sarai stiffened at the name she had heard it whispered in courtrooms and spy halls. A client species of the old empire who profited from endless conflicts, their arrival meant danger. She asked how soon. He said, within the week, and we will host them. The treaty bond will be examined. They will want to test its power. She asked what power. He said they believe it can activate something ancient, an echo defense grid built by the precursor races before our time. A system that responds to pairs who share that glow. The revelation struck her with both fear and curiosity. Her tutors had told stories of the precursors who seeded the galaxy with machines beyond comprehension. If the bond between her and Elias was truly linked to such relics, then their forced marriage was more than politics. It was a key and a cage she walked to, the window feeling the city's heartbeat under her feet. If the overseers came, they could seize the bond, use it to rule or to destroy. Elias seemed to read her thoughts. He said, we will find the truth before they arrive. I have a contact in the data spires of the north, someone who studies ancient code. He can trace the signal. She turned to him, surprised that he included her. He said it simply as if it were natural. The next day they took a small courier craft north over silver plains and green rivers. The city shrank behind them, and the mountains rose ahead, sharp against pale sky. The flight was quiet except for the hum of the engines. Sarai found herself watching the way he flew. No wasted movement, every control, smooth, precise. Yet he never seemed tense. He treated the machine as a partner, not a beast. She realized that he fought the same way, with respect for every element, even his enemies. The thought made her chest tighten again. She forced herself to look away when they landed at a lonely tower half buried in ice. The scholar awaited them, an old human woman with machine eyes and a voice like wind through wires. She bowed to Sarai with unexpected grace and said so. The bond wakes again. Inside the tower, screens flickered. With lines of code and fragments of ancient symbols, the scholar placed their hands under a scanner. The sigil shimmered and spread a pulse through the machines. Lights danced across the walls, forming a holographic map of energy threads woven through space like veins, the scholar whispered. The bond is not magic. It is a key to an old network built to protect life during the First Wars. It links pairs across distance when their trust aligns. It opens gates of shared perception. Elias frowned. Trust aligns, the scholar nodded. The system measures empathy, cooperation, will. The bond strengthens through consent, not control. Sarai felt a shiver run through her because in that moment the glow on her palm brightened again. Suddenly alarms blared red, lights cutting through the dim hall. The scholar's eyes flashed warning. A foreign signal had entered the network. The overseers had already found them. A small stealth drone burst through the window. Firing plasma darts, Elias pulled Sarai behind a column and drew his sidearm, returning precise shots that disabled the drone rather than destroying it. He rushed forward and tore out its core, a data spike still glowing. Sarai moved beside him, reading the glyphs etched on the metal it carried. Her people's code, twisted and corrupted. Someone from her own world was helping the overseers. She felt rage rise like fire. Elias looked at her and said, "We need to leave now. They will trace the signal." They fled down the ice valley, pursued by more drones, their engines echoing like angry bees. Elias guided the craft through a narrow canyon, using thermal vents to mask their trail. Sarai manned the rear turret, her hands steady despite the chaos she had trained for war before politics consumed her. She found her rhythm again, each burst of plasma timed with instinct. Elias called out maneuvers without raising his voice. His calm fed hers. Together they moved like a single thought. When they finally broke free of the canyon and jumped to orbit, the pursuit fell away. They sat in silence, breathing hard. The glow between their palms throbbed in rhythm with their hearts. On the return flight, she asked him how he learned to fight like that. He said quietly, "From watching those who lost. I learned not to waste life." She said, "You risked yours for me," and he replied without hesitation that he would do it again. Not because of duty, but because she was human enough to fight for others. She turned that phrase over in her mind. Human enough. It did not sound like insult. It sounded like bridge when they reached the city. Night had fallen and lights shimmered on the canals. He landed the craft softly, and they walked through the quiet streets. No crowd, no reporters. Just distant music from a barge. She felt the bond hum like a heartbeat under the stars. That night she could not sleep. She stood by the window watching the sky and thinking of the network. The scholar described a lattice of empathy connecting those who trust. She realized that every time Elias had shown her respect, the bond had grown stronger and that her defiance had dimmed it. She remembered his promise never to touch her without her yes, and for the first time she wondered what it would mean to choose that yes, not as surrender but as power, a shared choice, not a command. She touched her palm and felt warmth rise again. A soft light in the dark outside the city pulsed with energy as if answering her thought. Somewhere in the void, overseer ships were moving, closer drawn by the same glow. She could not yet decide whether the bond was a blessing or a trap. But she knew one truth now. She was no longer the woman who entered the hall in chains. She was part of something new, and the galaxy would feel it, soon. The hidden colony rose from the mist of a forgotten planet, a scattering of domes and spires that shimmered under a pale sun. Sarai and Elias approached in silence, the shuttle gliding through the low clouds, as if the planet itself wished to hide them from the wider galaxy. The ground was alive with strange vegetation, translucent leaves and flowers that hummed faintly when brushed by wind. The landing pad was empty except for a single figure waiting in the light, a tall alien with silver, hair and eyes like molten metal. The founder of the colony had aged but carried the weight of countless decisions in a posture that demanded attention. Sarai's chest tightened with a mix of awe and fear. She had been sent to marry a human as punishment. But now she faced the living heart of a secret she had only heard whispered in history lessons. The founder spoke without ceremony. "Welcome the emissaries of two worlds." Elias responded with a formal bow, and Sarai kept her head high, though the glow on her palms throbbed as if sensing the importance of the meeting. The founder studied them both with an intensity that felt like scrutiny of their very souls. Finally, she said, "The bond is real, and it has chosen wisely. There is much to show you." Both. They were led through corridors that pulsed with faint light and seemed to resonate with the bond. Sarai reached out instinctively to brush her hand against the wall, and felt a response, a soft vibration that traveled through her fingertips and echoed in her chest. The rooms were laboratories and training halls, the walls etched with patterns that mapped strategy and movement, like a living dance. They passed a hall of simulators where holographic enemies moved with uncanny realism. Sarai's eyes widened as she realized the colony had trained generations of humans and aliens together to anticipate and respond as a single unit. The bond was not just ceremonial, it was practical, a living tool. The founder led them to a central chamber where a globe of shimmering light hovered mid-air, streams of energy arcing between points and forming constellations in miniature. This was the heart of the colony's power, a network of predictive engines that could calculate enemy maneuvers. Seconds before they happened, Sarai felt the glow in her palms react stronger. Here, the bond with Elias pulsed in sync with the machines. She glanced at him and saw the same effect mirrored in his skin. It was not magic, it was instinct amplified. Through technology and consent, the founder watched them silently and then spoke. "You two must learn quickly, for the overseers know you exist." Sarai felt the weight of that warning settle like iron in her stomach. She had come expecting humiliation. She had come expecting a life constrained by protocol. But here was potential she had never imagined, a network of humans and aliens working together, sharing strategy and trust. The first thought that hit her was fear. If the overseers took this place, the galaxy could be thrown back into endless war. She looked at Elias and saw no hesitation, only resolve. He extended a hand as if asking for partnership, and she took it without thought. The sigil between them flared brightly, lighting the room with warm gold. The founder began to show them the records of the precursor grid, ancient machines hidden across the galaxy, capable of neutralizing fleets or turning defensive shields into traps. Sarai could feel the energy in the chamber responding. To their presence, the bond between her and Elias was somehow attuning to the pulse of the colony's systems. She asked what happens if someone else controls it, and the founder's eyes darkened. They can override the bond only if one partner is coerced. The sigil will respond to fear or dominance, but if trust is maintained, it amplifies coordination. not command. The statement made Sarai's stomach twist. She realized that the overseer's arrival would not just be a political challenge, it would be a test of choice, consent, and courage. Elias studied the console that mapped the energy flows. He turned to Sarai and said, "We need to understand it before they arrive." She nodded. Together they ran simulations, learning how the bond interacted. With the pattern engines, each movement they predicted. Each calculation synchronized their minds for a moment. Sarai felt something like exhilaration. She had never known that discipline and intuition could combine so seamlessly, yet it terrified her at the same time, because failure could cost more than lives, it could cost freedom. As they worked, the founders shared stories of previous bonded pairs, how they had learned to anticipate each other not through orders but through observation. Small gestures, subtle signals, trust in each other's judgment. Sarai realized that Elias had already been teaching her this in small ways. During the shuttle ride, during the fires in the city, he had let her make choices. Guided her subtly so the bond could respond naturally. He did not dominate or command. He had allowed her to grow confident enough to act independently, and the sigil had recognized it. Night fell over the colony, and the domes glowed softly under the pale sky. Sarai walked with Elias along a terrace overlooking a valley where hundreds of humans and aliens trained together. She felt the weight of the colony's history pressing against her shoulders, but also a strange hope that maybe punishment had brought her to a place of purpose. The wind stirred and the glow on her palms throbbed as if the planet itself responded to the promise of their bond. She turned to Elias and said, "They will come soon, won't they?" He nodded. "We must be ready," and she felt a strange steadiness in his calmness. Suddenly alarms flared the chamber below them. A stealth vessel had pierced the outer shield. The overseers were already testing the perimeter sensors. Sarai felt the sigil flare instinctively, and Elias grabbed her hand. They moved together, instinct guiding action and prediction as the colony's defense grids hummed to life, lights tracing paths across the valley below. Drones taking position and automated turrets aligning with precision. The bond allowed them to anticipate each other's movements without words. She ducked under a low beam and swung a console to disable a misfiring drone while Elias recalibrated a targeting node to protect the trainees. The synchronization felt like a dance centuries in the making. After the initial attack, the founder came to them. She said, "You have been chosen not just to survive, but to command the first line of defense. The overseers will push again soon. Every moment you hesitate, their advantage grows." Sarai looked at Elias and he nodded, and she realized that the punishment she had feared now felt like preparation. The bond was no longer just a mark. It was a tool, a lifeline, a bridge between two people and potentially thousands, more if they could teach it to extend beyond themselves. She clenched her fists and the glow flared brighter in response, as if acknowledging her resolve. That night in the quiet of her quarters, Sarai could not sleep, her mind racing over simulations and strategies. She traced the sigil lightly on her palm, feeling the warmth seep into her blood. She understood now that the forced marriage had been a spark, and the colony was the fire she had never expected to ignite. She looked at Elias sitting across the room reading quietly and thought for the first time that the punishment had given her purpose and perhaps even choice, and the galaxy was about to notice that choice for better or worse. The founder's warning lingered in her mind. The overseers were coming, and they would test not just their skill but their trust. The bond pulsed softly, as if answering her thoughts. Sarai knew she would not falter. She had been forced into a life she had not chosen, but now she stood at the heart of something vast and alive, a network of humans and aliens working together, guided by instinct and trust. And she understood that the galaxy's fate might hinge on the lessons she learned here. In the quiet pulse of the bond, she felt at last that she was not just a symbol. She was a participant, and the first true battle of the mind and heart was only beginning. The night before the final confrontation, the colony felt tense, like a string pulled too tight. Sarai walked along the corridors listening to the hum of the predictive engines and the quiet murmur of crews preparing defenses. She could feel the bond with Elias pulsing beneath her skin, each heartbeat a reminder that their trust had become something larger than either of them. They reached the central chamber where the engines glowed softly, and the founder was speaking to a small council of human and alien leaders. Sarai could see the exhaustion etched into every face, the weight of preparing for an attack that could destroy. Years of careful work. Elias stood beside her, quietly observing the preparations. He did not speak until Sarai looked at him. And then he said, "The overseers will test more than weapons. They will test fear control and loyalty. We must be ready to resist their manipulation." She nodded, understanding the depth of his words. The bond would respond not just to commands but to hesitation, doubt, or panic. The more fear they felt, the more vulnerable the network became. The founder had warned them that a coerced partner could trigger an override that would collapse defenses across the system. And Sarai realized how thin the line was between power and disaster. Later she walked through the training halls, seeing crews debate strategy, shouting commands, and adjusting drones and turrets. She noticed that morale wavered. Some questioned the strength of the bond and the loyalty of the humans. They worked with the alien trainees, whispered about old rivalries and mistrust. Sarai felt a flicker of frustration, wishing she could demand obedience instead. She remembered Elias's lessons about trust and restraint. The bond thrived not on fear or domination but on choice. She moved through the groups, quietly offering advice and support, listening more than commanding, and slowly the energy of the crews shifted from tension to controlled focus. In her quarters that night, she considered the ritual the founder had described, a procedure that could sever the bond permanently. It would leave a mark across the skin, a scar to remind one of what was lost. It would protect the colony from coercion, but at a personal cost. She thought of the glow in her palm and the way it pulsed in time with Elias, and wondered if she could bear to give it up. She remembered the lives that might depend on it, the freedom that might be lost, and a fear of choosing wrong gripped her heart. She did not speak of it immediately. She only ran her fingers over the faint patterns on her skin, feeling them thrum like a warning. Elias entered quietly, carrying a small tray of food. He placed it on the table without a word. She looked up surprised, and he said, "I know you are thinking of the ritual. It is your choice, not mine. You can sever the bond tonight if it will make you feel safe." She studied him for a long moment, the calm in his eyes, steadiness in his posture, the offer to relinquish control, and he added, "Even if it ruins everything, I will not stop you." She felt a wave of emotion rise from deep inside her, anger at the punishment she had endured, relief that she was given a voice, and an unexpected tenderness toward this human who had become more than a partner in battle. He had become a mirror showing her strength she had not known she possessed. Tears came unbidden, and she sat down, letting them flow while he sat nearby, not speaking, not touching, but present in a way that offered comfort. Instead of pressure, she realized that the bond was alive because of trust, not fear because of mutual recognition, not coercion. She wiped her face and said, "I will not sever it. Not tonight." She nodded to herself and then to him. "If we fail together, we fail together, and if we succeed, it will be because we choose to trust each other." He smiled faintly, a warmth in his eyes that made her pulse quicken, and for the first time she considered the possibility that choice could be stronger than punishment. They studied ancient archives together late into the night, tracing the precursor codes, looking for weaknesses and solutions, mapping every possible reaction. The bond allowed them to anticipate the signals across the system. Every adjustment they made synchronized their thoughts. Sarai realized that the patterns were not static. The bond amplified their cooperation. They could distribute responsibility and prediction across the network, but only if they maintained focus and calm. She watched Elias coordinate the flows, adjusting for variables she would not have noticed alone. It was a partnership that went beyond politics or duty. It was instinct and reason fused in a way that frightened her with its potential. In the quiet moments, she caught herself watching him handling data terminals, speaking softly to trainees, showing patience where others would have shouted. She thought of the fires in the city, of their first days together, and realized that every act of care he had shown had strengthened the bond. More than any ritual could she had expected control to feel like victory. But she found respect and choice far more potent, a trust she had not imagined possible between two beings from worlds that had fought for centuries. Dawn came pale over the horizon, and Sarai stood on the terrace overlooking the training grounds. Thousands of humans, and Aliens moving with purpose, guided by the predictive engines and by instinct. Each step measured the bond flaring faintly between her and Elias. She thought of the overseer's approaching of the final test of skill and trust, and she felt a steady resolve that she had never known when she had been a princess punished by decree. She had been powerless now. She was part of a network that could respond faster than fear could spread. She felt the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders. Like armor, Elias joined her silently, and together they watched the horizon, the distant shapes of overseer vessels gleaming faintly as they approached the system. The sigil between them pulsed brighter. As if sensing the threat, the wind carried the scent of the city below of wet metal and growing crops of engineered plants, the pulse of life that the colony had built. It all depended on the discipline and trust they had nurtured. The night had tested them emotionally, physically and mentally, and she realized that every moment of choice they had made strengthened the bond more than any command or law could. Sarai took a deep breath and said aloud, "We are ready." He turned to her, the glow between their palms brightening, and said, "Yes, because we choose to be together in this. No one is forced." The sigil responded as if acknowledging the affirmation. The colony below stirred as thousands of beings prepared for the coming test. Every crew member synchronized with their own training, but also with the pulse of the bond. She had felt fear earlier and hesitation, and now only determination remained in her chest. She looked at Elias, and finally allowed herself to consider that punishment had been transformed into purpose, and that trust might be the most dangerous and powerful weapon in the galaxy. As the first glints of the Overseer fleet appeared beyond the atmosphere, the colony's defense systems came alive, guided by predictive engines. The trainees moved with instinct. The bond flared across multiple nodes, creating a network that was responsive and adaptive. Sarai felt the power of choice course through her as she and Elias synchronized their strategies, each action precise, each decision measured and intentional. They had learned that the glow pulsed not because they were forced together, but because they had chosen to protect and to act, and in that choice they found strength. The night before, collapse had passed into a dawn of purpose, and the first real battle was only moments away. The morning of the final confrontation broke pale and tense over the colony, the air crisp and humming with the energy of predictive engines and the quiet murmurs of thousands preparing for battle. Sarai and Elias stood at the heart of the command center, the glow of the bond between their palms strong now, as if sensing the danger approaching beyond the atmosphere. The Overseer fleet was visible as tiny glimmers on the horizon, distant shapes that carried the weight of centuries of conquest. Yet here they were, about to face more than weapons. They were about to face strategy and instinct woven into a single force. Elias spoke softly and clearly to Sarai, and she could feel the pulse of his words sync with the bond. "We will run the first stage by broadcasting the map of our weak points across the channels we control. If the Overseers attempt to exploit them, we force them to divide attention. The key is not to deceive, but to control the reaction without panic." Sarai nodded. She understood immediately it was a gamble, a mental and strategic maneuver, not brute strength. The colony had prepared them for this, and the bond would amplify their coordination if they moved. Together consciously, they could turn the enemy's expectations into their own advantage. The first wave of drones approached silently, skimming the atmosphere. The colony's automated turrets rose and aligned, guided by predictive nodes that pulsed. In harmony with Sarai and Elias, the bond flared each of their movements, anticipating the other, before a command was even spoken. She ducked under a low ceiling of the control chamber and recalibrated a targeting drone, while Elias activated a sequence. To shift power through the outer shields, the glow pulsed brighter as if the network itself was alive, responding to their intent. Every action synchronized their minds. They moved as one mind, with multiple bodies anticipating and countering every attack. From the observation deck, Sarai could see the ships begin to split as predicted. The broadcast of the mapped weak points had drawn the Overseers into dividing their fleet into smaller task groups. They attempted to exploit what they thought were vulnerabilities. But the colony anticipated each move. The bond allowed Sarai and Elias to predict timing gaps in energy flows and vector the microdrones into intercept paths without alerting the Overseers to the full extent of the network. Their coordinated effort forced the enemy to commit resources inefficiently, and already the tide began to shift. Inside the command hall, The air was thick with tension. The younger trainees moved rapidly under guidance, but without panic. Their motions mirrored Sarai and Elias's instincts. The bond extended subtly through the network. They did not need to speak. Every signal anticipated another. The colony itself seemed to breathe and respond with them. Sarai adjusted power conduits while Elias rerouted energy through secondary nodes, creating a cascade effect that strengthened the shields and destabilized incoming volleys. The hum of engines and turbines became a rhythm she could feel in her chest. Each pulse a heartbeat of cooperation. The overseers realized too late that their calculations were being anticipated. Each feint they sent was countered or rerouted without loss of efficiency. The flagship moved to intercept, but the gravity wells surrounding the colony had been calibrated to trap it without risking civilian populations or the main base. The bond flared stronger as Sarai and Elias synchronized the final maneuvers. She felt the thrill of anticipation mingled with fear. If they misjudged even a single variable, the lattice could collapse and the colony would be vulnerable. Yet the shared decision-making of the bond guided every choice. Elias moved to a terminal on the edge of the chamber, monitoring drones and micronodes. She mirrored him on the opposite side, adjusting the power matrix for the energy shields. Together, they created a predictive rhythm, the bond pulsing like a metronome. The Overseer flagship entered the lattice, and for a moment the air vibrated with the potential of disaster. The engines screamed, and warning lights flashed, but the colony responded faster than the ships could calculate. Every beam and drone positioned precisely. The flagship struggled and then became trapped within the gravity lattice. It could not retreat or advance without triggering cascading defenses. Sarai and Elias felt the bond flare intensely as the network fed back through them, through predictive algorithms, into human and alien hands across the colony. The trainees reacted without hesitation, their movements smooth, precise, every minor adjustment. A response to an instinctive cue, the overseers attempted override protocols, and the colony's systems flared in response. The bond amplified their coordination, spreading across the network like fire. It did not belong to them alone. It belonged to every conscious participant connected through trust and choice. The enemy's attempts to control were reflected back with countermeasures they could not anticipate. A reactor surge threatened to destabilize the outer shield nodes. Sarai glanced at Elias. His eyes calm yet focused. The bond allowed her to anticipate his next actions. She moved in concert, rerouting energy and stabilizing circuits, while Elias coordinated ground crews to distribute the load. The glow pulsed through them in waves of light and warmth. They felt the strain, but each pulse reinforced the network. Each movement predicted the next. They were not just partners, they were anchors holding the system together. Finally, as the surge stabilized, the flagship remained trapped, the colony's defenses intact. The overseers had no room to maneuver and began retreating to avoid destruction. They were exposed and leaderless. As Sarai watched, she realized that the victory had come not from firepower alone but from cooperation instinct and the trust embedded in the bond. Her heart raced with the realization that punishment had forged something greater than either she or Elias could have imagined. The bond had become a weapon of choice rather than force. In the aftermath, crews moved swiftly, repairing minor damages and tending to the trainees who had fallen in the early waves. Sarai and Elias walked together through the command hall, surveying the network. The eye glow between their palms had softened but remained active, a reminder of what they had accomplished together. She touched his hand lightly, and he returned the gesture without ceremony. The bond pulsed softly, as if acknowledging their joint effort. She realized that every decision they had made had been amplified by trust and consent, not obligation or fear. They stepped outside onto the terrace overlooking the valley below. Lights twinkled from active nodes, the city slowly returning to calm. The bonded pairs and crews moved in quiet celebration. Their coordination had prevented catastrophe, and now the first wave of training would expand to teach more individuals how to replicate instinctive synchronization. She looked at Elias and saw the calm satisfaction in his eyes that had always unsettled her. A smile touched her lips. She realized that the punishment she had feared had created an opportunity for a network stronger than any command or decree. The first real test was over, and the colony had held the line. The bond had proven more than a mark or symbol. It had become a living tool capable of amplifying choice and trust across thousands. She felt the weight of responsibility still heavy but tempered by the knowledge that they had succeeded together. She squeezed Elias's hand and felt the pulse respond. And she knew that this was only the beginning, that the galaxy had seen what humans and aliens could accomplish when instinct and cooperation joined, and that the overseers would never underestimate the power of choice again. In the quiet after the battle, the stars above reflected faintly in the valley below. The bond pulsed softly like a heartbeat, and Sarai felt the thrill of shared purpose. She turned to Elias and whispered that together they could build more than defense. They could build a future. The glow brightened slightly in response, as if agreeing, and she finally understood that punishment had been transformed into strategy and trust, into strength, and that the galaxy had been forced to notice the bond between them, not as a weakness but as a herald of unbroken courage. The aftermath of the battle left the colony buzzing with energy. The glow from the predictive engines still pulsed faintly across the domes like a heartbeat, and Sarai walked beside Elias, feeling the weight of what they had accomplished and the responsibility that still lay ahead. The overseers had retreated for now, but their presence lingered as a threat and a reminder that the galaxy would not yield easily. She glanced at the training grounds where humans and aliens moved together, sharing instinct and intuition, guided by the bond she felt in her palm. The network had survived its first trial and had grown stronger in its wake. Elias spoke softly as they walked through the corridors. "We have stabilized the immediate threat, but the next challenge will be maintaining trust and coordination across the wider network." Sarai nodded. She understood fully that their bond was no longer personal alone. It had become a symbol and a tool of cooperation that could ripple through entire systems. Yet she also felt the thrill of its intimate power, the way it pulsed between them, a constant reminder that choice and consent could outweigh force and fear. She squeezed his hand lightly, and the glow responded with warmth and rhythm. The founder met them in the central chamber, her silver hair glinting in the soft light, and said, "You have passed the test. The bond has proven resilient and adaptive. Now it is time to extend it beyond the colony." Sarai and Elias listened as she described plans to link other settlements nearby to the network, creating a web of predictive coordination that could anticipate threats and neutralize them without unnecessary loss of life. The thought was dizzying in its scale, yet Sarai felt a surge of pride knowing that the bond she had once considered punishment was now the foundation of a new kind of strategy. In the following days they worked tirelessly, teaching pairs of humans and aliens to synchronize instinct and reasoning. Sarai found herself guiding trainees through the process, showing how to read subtle cues, how to anticipate movement, and how to act without hesitation. The bond pulsed faintly with each connection, a visible thread of energy linking participants, and Elias stood beside her, coordinating logistics and calibrating the predictive engines, ensuring that every new pair could integrate seamlessly into the network. Sarai realized that they were no longer just leaders or partners. They were catalysts, shaping a living system that could respond faster than any single mind. One evening, they stood on a terrace overlooking the valley, watching pairs practice maneuvers across the open fields. The glow between their palms was steady now, a soft pulse like a heartbeat in quiet solidarity. Sarai leaned slightly toward Elias and said, "It feels strange to think of punishment leading to this," and he smiled faintly. "It was not punishment," he said. "It was preparation." She realized then that every moment of resistance, every challenge she had faced, had built her capacity to act with clarity and purpose, not just for herself but for others. The bond had amplified her courage and judgment, as it had his, and together they had transformed fear into power. The overseers returned in small scout vessels, attempting to probe the outer network. Sarai and Elias monitored the incoming signals, predicting their paths and intentions. The bond pulsed in unison with the predictive engines. Every calculation synchronized their movements across the command hall. She felt the thrill of anticipation and focus. They had trained for this moment for months, every gesture calculated yet instinctive, every command amplified across the network without error. When the overseer scouts attempted to manipulate a node, they found it unresponsive. The bond and training had created a living barrier based on choice and trust rather than force. In the quiet moments between alerts, Sarai reflected on how far they had come. She had arrived as a princess forced into a marriage she had not chosen, and yet, through cooperation, instinct, and trust, she had become a leader not just of a colony, but of a system capable of defending itself against the galaxy's most cunning threats. She glanced at Elias, who watched the horizon with calm certainty, and felt a warmth that was no longer fear or anger, but a recognition of partnership and equality. The glow between their palms was steady, strong, and alive. As the final skirmishes ended, the overseers withdrew, acknowledging the resilience of the network. Sarai and Elias coordinated repairs and upgrades, ensuring that the colony's defenses would remain robust. They addressed the trainees together, emphasizing choice, consent, and mutual respect. The network was no longer just a tool for survival. It was a symbol of what cooperation could achieve across species boundaries. Sarai realized that the punishment she had suffered had been transformed into strategy and unity, a living testament to human and alien potential. Working in concert, at last she stood on the terrace with Elias beneath the stars, the valley below quiet and the domes glowing softly with the energy of the network. She turned to him and said, "The marriage will continue because I choose it, not because of decree or sentence." His eyes reflected the starlight and he nodded, understanding and respect. They touched palms lightly, the sigil pulsing softly, as if acknowledging their shared choice. The moment was quiet, but powerful, a first true embrace born of trust and partnership, not obligation or control. The founder approached and placed her hands briefly on their shoulders, saying, "The galaxy has seen what humans and aliens can accomplish when instinct and trust are fused together. This is the beginning of a new order, not of domination but of chosen bonds, cooperation, and vigilance." Sarai looked at the valley, the trainees moving in harmony, the bond pulsing faintly across each pair, and understood that the punishment had been a spark and the colony a fire that could spread. The network would grow and the galaxy would change because choice and consent had proven stronger than fear. As night deepened, the lights of the colony reflected on the surface of the valley. Rivers, the predictive engines, pulsed faintly, and Sarai and Elias walked through the corridors side by side, hands brushing lightly occasionally, the bond between them brightening softly, a reminder that it was alive and responsive, that it could be a weapon when wielded through trust and a shield. When guided by consent, the galaxy had witnessed human ingenuity and alien adaptability working together, and the first test had been survived, not just with strategy but with courage and understanding. The final moments came quietly. The colonists settled into routines, the network humming with energy and anticipation for the future. Sarai looked at Elias and said together, "We can build more than defense. We can build a future." He nodded. The bond pulsed brighter in response, and she felt a deep satisfaction knowing that the punishment that had brought them together had become a foundation for hope and strength. She realized that humanity's courage was not in domination, but in offering choice first, and trusting that the other would rise to meet it. The colony below glimmered in the soft starlight, the bond pulsing gently, a heartbeat of shared purpose. Sarai and Elias looked out over the valley, knowing that the overseers had been defeated, not by force, but by coordination, instinct, and trust, and that the network they had built would grow across worlds, a living symbol of cooperation and human potential. The night was quiet, and the stars above seemed to shine a little brighter. The galaxy had been changed, and for the first time Sarai felt a sense of completion, a sense that punishment had become opportunity, choice had become strength, and the bond between them had become unbroken.